Amara, a 15-year-old student, knew that appearances were sometimes all the world saw of a person. Daughter of Mr. Toussaint, the director of a private school renowned for its academic excellence and its students from the best families, she had learned from an early age to blend into the crowd, not to attract attention. Her brown eyes, both deep and curious, concealed a lively intelligence that she tried to keep discreet. Her shy smile was a way of appeasing curious glances, while her perfectly styled hair, always in the rules of academic elegance, ensured that she never stood out too much from the shadows. In the corridors of the school, Amara had learned to observe, to understand the social dynamics that were playing out around her. Her gaze sometimes lingered on the groups of privileged students, whose laughter resonated like peals of a world to which she did not quite belong. The distance separating her from her comrades was palpable, but she didn't pay much attention to it. After all, she knew that her path would be paved by academic excellence, and that this alone could open doors that were denied to her because of her social origin. Amara was a model student. Passionate about history and literature, she quickly distinguished herself in these subjects. She was fascinated by the stories of struggles, revolts, and resistance that spanned world history. What attracted him above all was the way in which marginalized voices, often ignored or erased, managed to emerge, to be heard despite violence and oppression. It gave her an inner strength, a desire to prove that her origins did not define her, that her intelligence and passion were the real weapons she had. But at school, everything was not so simple. Some of her classmates were barely able to hide their contempt, to hide the condescending looks they gave her, as if, because of her origins, she did not deserve to be here, among them, in this sanctuary of the academic elite. To them, Amara was just an exception that only proved the rule. People like her weren't made to shine in places like this. Amara often felt alone in the face of this invisible barrier, but she persisted, convinced that her results would be the best answer to those who doubted her place here. However, there was one person who, despite everything, did not just look down on her in silence. Ms. Lemoyne. This woman, who proudly wore her title of French and history teacher, was a feared figure at the school. Her sharp gaze, her authoritative voice, and her constant need for control made her a person who seemed above the rest, not only in her status as an educator, but also in the way she imposed her idea of culture and intellect. Ms. Lemoyne undoubtedly believed herself to be a sort of guardian of academic purity, and, in her eyes, Amara was an intruder in this elitist universe. Amara had quickly noticed Madame Lemoyne's coldness towards her. It wasn't overtly hostile, not at first. But the harsh remarks, the innuendos, the little barbs had become more and more frequent. Amara knew she was perceived differently from the other students, but what Ms. Lemoyne was doing was more than just disapproval. She tolerated it, but never fully accepted it. She pushed her to justify herself, to prove that she had her place here, using criteria that had nothing to do with her skills or her work. One day, when Amara had handed in a perfect copy for an assignment on the history of the civil rights movement in the United States, Ms. Lemoyne made a comment that she dropped like a stone in water, disturbing the apparent calm of the class. In a dry and condescending tone, she said, "You are really lucky to have such good results, Amara. But you are not like the other students at this school. This is not what we expect here. You would do well to remember where you came from." The silence that followed was heavy. The other students quickly looked away, some uncomfortable, others curious, but none protested. Amara felt her cheeks flush, a stinging heat filling her face. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but she didn't have the strength. The pain of being judged on the color of your skin, of seeing yourself devalued not for your performance but for what you represented, was too violent. She lowered her head, doing her best to hide the glint of tears that threatened to burst into her eyes. The weeks that followed only got worse. Madame Lemoyne, no doubt feeling that she had taken control of Amara, did not deprive herself of it. During a tutorial session, she compared Amara to her classmates, calling her too quiet and too shy, as if her presence was just some sort of misunderstanding. She even accused him of being too brilliant for his own culture, insinuating that his academic success was an anomaly, something she should seek to justify, instead of accepting as a given. Amara knew she couldn't defend herself. The students around her looked at her in silence, many of them understanding that there was a form of injustice in this treatment, but none wanted to take the risk of opposing Ms. Lemoyne. She was too powerful a figure to challenge. Thus, Amara, although strong in her results, felt more and more alone and invisible. Then came the day when everything exploded. During one of her presentations, a topic she had chosen on black revolts in America, Amara expected the class to be impressed by her in-depth knowledge of the subject. She had studied every aspect, from slave revolts to the civil rights struggle. But Madame Lemoyne, who was listening to him with a detached air, suddenly stood up with a disdainful smile and spoke. "That's a story of rebellion, eh? A real story of protest. I would have preferred that you were more interested in authors who reflect true academic culture. But hey, that's not surprising, coming from someone who seems more attached to the history of the oppressed than to the history of the elite." The nervous laughter of the other students echoed in the room. The sound, like a cold echo, reverberated in Amara's mind. She felt an oppressive heat invade her face. His cheeks, usually hidden by his shyness, burned with humiliation. The murmurs intensified around her, amplifying her feeling of worthlessness. Her heart was beating faster, but she forced herself to remain calm, not to let the bitterness seething inside her. She lowered her head, fixing her hands on the desk, as if to protect herself from this wave of indifference that engulfed her. It was as if the room, in an instant, had become a stage where she was only an invisible character, spectator of her own rejection. She was overcome by a strange feeling of disconnection. That day, more than ever, she felt like a stranger in this place that she had always called school. A place supposed to be a refuge of knowledge and fulfillment had transformed into an arena where she was constantly judged for her belonging, for her identity. When Amara returned home, she didn't say a word to her parents. His feet dragged on the ground, and his thoughts were heavy. Each movement seemed more mechanical than the last. Silently, she slipped into her room, threw herself on her bed and buried her face in the pillow. There, alone in the darkness, she let tears escape, without a word, without a cry. His pain was intimate, too great to be shared. It wasn't just the humiliation she had just experienced that consumed her, but this feeling of being rejected for something she couldn't change. What Amara didn't know was that her silence would soon become the catalyst for an unexpected change. His father, Mr. Toussaint, had a keen intuition. A man of great wisdom and very observant, he had noticed a subtle change in his daughter's behavior in recent days. His eyes, usually sparkling with energy and curiosity, had become dull. His smiles, less frequent, became more forced. In the morning, she was no longer in a hurry to go to school. She went there out of obligation, without the passion that had always driven her. Mr. Toussaint, concerned, decided not to let this uneasiness pass. One evening after dinner, when Amara seemed more distant than ever, he looked deeply into her eyes. "Amara, you know you can tell me anything, right?" he asked in a soft but firm voice. Amara didn't have the courage to answer immediately. She looked down, wringing her hands. Then, after a while, the truth burst forth, like a surging wave that could no longer be contained. "Mom, Dad, there is Madame Lemoyne." Her voice trembled. "She hates me. She makes me feel like I don't belong. She belittles me every day, she says cruel things, things that have nothing to do with my results." Amara's words were filled with pain and injustice, like a silent cry. Mr. Toussaint, looking shocked, stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. His dignity and respect for his daughter were being tested, and he could not let this affront go unanswered. "You are right, my daughter. This is not acceptable. And what you suffer cannot remain without consequences. This isn't just a problem for you, it's a problem for everything we represent." He took a deep breath, his gaze becoming more intense. "I will take care of it, and this situation will change." The next day, Mr. Toussaint requested an urgent meeting with Mrs. Lemoyne. He went to the teacher's room, his step determined, his gaze firm. When he entered Madame Lemoyne's office, he found her, as always, sitting behind her desk, with her superior air and her condescending smile. But this time, he wasn't going to be impressed. Madame Lemoyne, I have just learned of your actions towards my daughter, and believe me, you have crossed the line. This kind of racist and contemptuous behavior has no place in my establishment." His voice did not tremble. He had control of the situation, and he wasn't about to give it up. "You will bear the consequences." Madame Lemoyne tried to deny, to minimize, but Mr. Toussaint was prepared. He had already collected testimonies from Amara's classmates, students who courageously dared to speak out. In addition, he had asked the school social worker to conduct a discreet investigation into the racist climate in certain classes. The results were overwhelming. The truth could no longer be ignored. Ms. Lemoyne could no longer hide behind her airs of authority. When the news spread through the school, the effect was immediate. Some students, inspired by the courage of Mr. Toussaint and Amara, began to discreetly denounce Ms. Lemoyne's abuse. Others, much more courageous, took a public stand, joining the cause. At a board meeting, Mr. Toussaint presented a solid case, supported by testimonies and tangible evidence, exposing the systematic discrimination perpetrated by Ms. Lemoyne. The teacher, at first arrogant and sure of her power, found herself in a position of total weakness. She was suspended indefinitely and disciplinary proceedings were launched against her. The parents of the students concerned, including Mr. Toussaint, showed solidarity, determined to face the injustice. Amara, although having suffered in her soul, found an unsuspected courage within herself. She was no longer just a brilliant student in the shadows. She had become a symbol of resistance. His voice, once mute and muffled, had resounded against injustice. She had become a spokesperson for those who did not have the courage to speak, a beacon in the darkness. The school, following the incident, decided to introduce compulsory training on diversity, equality, and the fight against discrimination for all members of staff. As for Amara, although she had regained her place among the best students, this time, she stood straighter, stronger, more confident. She knew that her fight for dignity and recognition was not over, but she now had the tools to fight it.